were talking about polyphony last time. I mentioned that how music started in the sense that it was only one melody, and that's called monophonic. And then we talked about polyphony, polyphonic. So polyphonic means two or more melodies sung at the same time by different people. Okay, that's the main difference. So monophony is only one melody, while polyphony is two or more or many melodies. Okay. So actually, in the 14th century, there was a very important school in Notre Dame in Paris, where two composers worked, and their names were Leoninus and Perotinus, very strange names. They were very important because they wrote a lot of music for two melodies at the same time, so a lot of polyphonic pieces. Leoninus, in particular, this guy here wrote this Magnus Liber Organi, which I will ask you this question in the exam, because it contains probably, it may be in the exam, actually, maybe not, but it's important, so I underlined it anyway. Because it contains more than 100 pieces of polyphony, so that's a lot, okay, for two voices. This was actually called organum purum. So what is organum purum? I mentioned last time that the term polyphony was not used at the time, but they used the term organum to refer to the practice of singing two or more melodies at the same time. Basically, you had in organum, at the time, you have a tenor line, which was the pre-existing melody, so the melody that already existed before. And then you had the duplum, which was the second voice, so the second melody, so the melody that actually was new. So you have to imagine that you are singing one melody, and then someone else starts singing another melody on top of that, and then that's how you have an organum purum. That's pretty much what it is, fundamentally. There's a picture of a manuscript here. That's actually the original manuscript. Now, you don't have to be able to read that because it's difficult if you're not used to music, but you can see all those little signs on the score, or this little dot. Those are all notes, basically, okay? And there are two voices. But I just want to show you a picture of the original manuscript and how it looks like. The other guy I mentioned earlier was Perotinus, so Leoninus and Perotinus. This is important because kind of Perotinus took Leoninus' work a step further in the sense that he started to add the two more voices. First, he started to add a third melody, and then he added a fourth melody. So things are getting more complicated now because instead of two melodies, now you have three or four. And this is very important. You have to understand that because this is really the beginning of our music. When you have three or more melodies at the same time, these are chords, harmony. That's what we use today in every kind of music, like pop or rock, or etc., etc. So this is really the basic. So you have three voices, right? Triplum, and then you have four voices, quadruplum. And now things get difficult because you have to be able to compose for three melodies at the same time, so it's not easy, but that's really the fundamental of our concept of harmony of chords. This is an example. It's not going to be in the quiz, but you should listen to it for a minute, just because it gives you an idea how this music sounds like, which is in this case is for four voices. As you can see here in the picture down the score, you have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So these are four voices that are the four voices I was talking about earlier. Now there is a very important movement that was going on in the 14th century, which is called the Ars Nova, which translated in English is new art. Why new art? Because there was some experimentation, including those of this guy here. His name was Franco of Cologne. Cologne is a city, so he was from Cologne. That's why it's called Cologne. And he wrote basically this very interesting treatise in which he classifies music through consonants and dissonances. Now, I don't know if you know what consonant and dissonant means, but I will explain it very briefly. So a consonant means when something sounds pleasant to the ear, right? To the ears. While dissonant sounds bad. It sounds harsh. Like, sometimes it happens, not so much in pop music today, but, if you listen to some kind of music, you have some dissonances too, like in jazz too. I'm going to play an example now, but I want to show you something else first. So basically what he did, he classified all the consonant and dissonant intervals. So the intervals are the distance between the notes. For instance, the octave, so 8 notes, the fourth, when there are 4 notes apart, the fifth, the sixth, the triton. So you don't have to memorize these names, but I just want you to understand the concept of consonant and dissonant, okay? So I'm going to play an example so I think you will understand much better. So let me exit from here for a second. I'm going to go online. I'm going to open another page online. And I'm going to find an online keyboard. So I'm going to play some of these intervals, some of these notes. Let's see. Here we go. Okay. So let's see. Let's open this one, for example. Okay. So if I play these 2 notes, this actually sounds quite consonant. So it sounds good. Even if I play these 2 notes, that's a C G. So it's like a fifth. That sounds good too, I think. And I think you would agree with me. And even if I play this, it sounds pretty good, right? But then what if I play something like this? Like it's a minor 7. It sounds quite bad. So that's a dissonance. That's why I said dissonance, because it doesn't sound good. Even worse would be this one. Right? So that's what dissonant and consonant means. So something like that would sound consonant. Right? Sounds good. But something like this sounds very dissonant. Right? So let's go back for a second. So this is just for you to understand what consonant and dissonant means. Now, there was this other guy as well. His name was Guillaume de Machaut. He was another French composer. He was the first to experiment with fixed forms. He wrote a lot of different kinds of music. So we talk about he wrote secular and religious. And we talked about last time in my previous lecture. I talked about how at the beginning music was we only have religious music, but then by the 12th century we start to see some secular songs, right? So secular music. So this guy wrote both secular music and religious music. But he also is important for the fixed form or the form fix, which are basically some kinds of songs structures. But you have to know the name. So ballade, rondeau, and virelai, which are very difficult to explain in technical terms, and you don't have to know it because I usually don't teach this in this class because it's more advanced. But what these are structure of songs. Like in pop music, for instance, you have like A, B, A, like you have verse, refrain, verse, refrain. Sometimes you have a bridge and C, like A, B, A, B, C. Like this kind of thinking about forms, about having a structure, actually comes back to this period. So when you have a refrain, you have a verse, refrain, and so on. So for the purpose of this class, all you have to do is memorize these 3 names, which is ballade, rondeau, and virelai, which are basically 3 different types of French songs at that time, secular songs. He also composed this very famous mass, the Mass of Our Lady, and this will actually be there will be a question in the quiz, so you should listen to this one. I'm not going to play the example right now because it's complicated and the audio would not sound great with when I post videos on YouTube, because it would obscure the audio a little bit, so I'm not going to play it, but you should play it. And it's this one here, and it's interesting because it has 4 voices. It's very difficult to perform. So around 1350 and 1450 in Florence, we start to see something important. So I'm pretty sure you guys heard something about the early Renaissance, or the Renaissance period, which means rebirth, right? So there was a lot of things happening during this time. There was a rebirth of science, a rebirth of art, of culture, of poetry, of music, especially, but every field. So this period was so important for us today because a lot of discoveries were made and a lot of experimentations with art were actually made as well. So there's a difference now because now secular music become as important, if not more important, than religious music, and the composers started to pay attention to other types of music that are not religious, so basically secular songs, love songs, and things like that. But they also start to think about music for human pleasure, not just or delight or recreation, entertainment, not just for religious purposes. Okay, this is called also musical humanism, which is very, 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 very important. Why Florence? So Florence was the cradle, the birth city of the Renaissance, because there were some very important rich families working there, who living there, sorry, who sponsored a lot of scientists, a lot of artists, and the lot of even a lot of artists from Northern Europe went to Florence to work because that's where the money was at that time, right? And so you have people like Leonardo da Vinci and very Michelangelo and very important, very, very famous. I'm sure you heard at least one or two of them. Okay. But in music, also in the 14th century, you have this very important in Florence manuscript, which is called the Squarcialupi Codex. The Squarcialupi Codex is the collection of one of the largest collection of 14th century Italian secular music. So in the 14th century means 1300s. It's mostly secular music. We do not know who compiled this manuscript, who made the manuscript. We think that it was this guy Squarcialupi. That's why it's called Squarcialupi Codex, which is very difficult to pronounce in English. But it contains a lot of. So it's the large. I will ask you this in the exam. It's a question. If you go back to the rubric, you will see there is a question about this. That's called the Squarcialupi Codex, right? And it's the largest collection of Italian early Renaissance music, so 14th century music. The late Renaissance, basically, during the late Renaissance, composers and artists and poets were very interested toward classical antiquity again, because so they started to study classical antiquity again. And when I say the late Renaissance, I mean roughly from 1475 to 1600. But these, of course, are just dates, so they must be taken with a grain of salt. Something very important is happening now, so you have to know this. So first of all, with the late Renaissance, composers tried to find new way to express meaning in music. So they turn away from polyphony a little bit, and they start writing music that was about the text, not just about the music. So the words, the lyrics, that they want to emphasize the lyrics of the song, okay? Not just music and the technical aspect of music. That was one thing that you have to remember. The other, I think, even more important aspect is the invention of, sorry, let me fix this. The invention of music printing, because why is important? Because printing in general is very important because it allowed faster dissemination of everything, not just music, of books, of religious books, scientific books. So before this period, uh, music, art, science was disseminated fundamentally through manuscripts. But the problem with that is that manuscripts were accessible only to a restricted group of people because it costs a lot of money to make manuscripts. So now with printing, more people would have access to the music, to the art, or anything that is written down. Okay. There was also a difference between art music and popular music. So art music, it's kind of what we think today of classical and jazz, and popular music is what we think today as pop and rock. So it's kind of they had their own idea of music too. So something that was more popular, something more entertaining, and something that was lighter in style, versus something that was actually more serious, so it's more intellectual, I would say, to understand. And so something that was lighter versus something that was more difficult. Now the lighter style that happens in the 14th century. Now some kind of popular music, especially were the carnival songs. The carnival songs are very popular. Carnival was a very important festivity at that time. Everybody put masks on and they danced and they danced and they sang songs and stuff. These happened in Florence, and these are called carnival song. In Italian, were called canti carnascialeschi. Okay, I will ask you this in the exam too because that's important. The other kind of popular music at the time was the frottola here. The frottola was very similar to the carnival songs, but the difference is that sometimes it was also polyphonic. It was also for 3 or 4 voices, and also could be sung on one person with instrument. But also it flourished in Italy between 1470 and 1530, and it was strictly secular, so it was nothing to do with religion. It was mostly performed at court, right? So in some kind of very secular settings, it was supposed to entertain. It was not supposed to be serious at all. Okay. He had strophes, rhymes too, sometimes. So it's like a poem set to music, but it was supposed to be entertaining. Okay, it was not supposed to be serious. Now, this is a very famous example of a frottola. It's called El Grillo, which in English translates as the cricket, and sometimes the people thought about this as some very funny allusions, like sexual allusion or other kind of things, but because of the text, it was supposed to be funny. It was supposed to, again, entertain, not be serious. And you can listen to this piece here as well, of course. It's right here. Then, on the other hand, I'll ask yourself, so the popular music were the carnival songs and the frottola. What about the serious music? So they actually had more intellectual music as well, like us today. And this was the madrigal. So the madrigal was basically a polyphonic piece for different melodies, could be different voices, could be for 4, 5, even 6 or more voices. And the difference between this and the previous kinds of music I mentioned is that this was based on very serious poetry. So poetry written by very important poets, serious about love, about other social aspects, and these were actually performed in more formal gatherings, so like academies or literary gatherings of people, of writers, philosophers. And they were very important, and women also participated in these academies, in this gathering, and some of them became very famous too, because women were not allowed to sing in church, but they were allowed to sing at court or in these secular settings. So that's the madrigal. And there is an example. Two of the fathers of the madrigals, they're not the first composers of madrigals, but very important in the history of the early madrigal, are Arcadel and Verdelot, who were two French composers working in Italy. Okay, and you can listen to an example of a madrigal here by one I underlined here. So this question will be in the exam too. The two important composers of the madrigals were Arcadel and Verdelot. You should remember that. You will see in the rubric when I do the exam review. It will be even clearer. Okay. So with the madrigal, they were actually experimenting with what we call text painting. Text painting means they were trying to use music and sound to portray a particular word, so to portray the meaning of a specific word. Okay, that's called text painting or word painting. It's something that we still do today, actually, in pop music or other kinds of music as well. Okay, so the attention now is toward the text, the lyrics, not just the music. And that's an example, the last example of a madrigal, which is by Jacques Arcadel, and it's another, you should listen to it, and you can see how it tries to use music to portray different emotions, different feelings, okay? So again, they are trying to experiment with the lyrics, not just music. Then, let me go back here for a second. The last thing I want to talk about today in the lecture, which is basically all the material for the first exam, let me go back. It's actually the first slide of week 4. So the first exam will cover up until, I'll show you where, until dance music in the Renaissance, so which is this one here. So they all, in the Renaissance period, they also had their own dances, right? Dance music. And there were 3 types of dances in the Renaissance: the Gaillard, the Pavane, right? Which eventually replaced the bastons. Okay, the bastons was the main dance until the 15th century. So the difference between these 3 dances is, of course, the steps, different steps associated with the music, but also the music, because one, for instance, the bastons was more slow, while the pavane, usually was dancing couple, holding hands, was usually faster. And here, and they also follow different tempos. So for instance, the Gaillard was in treble meter, which means 3/4 or 6/4. So you have 6 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So to these 6 beats, you have 6 steps, and so on. And you can actually listen also to an example here of a Gaillard. For if you are curious, actually you should listen to it because it helps. So actually, this is just a picture of Elizabeth, Queen of England, dancing a Gaillard. Okay, in a famous painting. So actually, as I was saying, the exam will stop here. So the first exam will stop here in this slide. So up until here, up until Gaillard, Pavane, and Bastons. So this will be the last question. In fact, if you go back to the rubric, and I'll do the exam review in my next video. So if you go back to rubric exam 1, you will see that the first question is about ancient Greece, which is the second week of slides, and then it stops here. The most popular Renaissance dance in France, Bastons, Pavane. This is the last question. So there's no more than that. Nothing more, nothing less in the exam. These are the 25 questions, but I'll talk about that later. Again, so you should focus on this. Just watch the videos, the first 3 videos I made. I will wait to make another video because so you can focus on those 2 or 3 to study for the exam, and make sure you start looking at the rubric, and then I'll do another video for the exam, which is on exam review for the rubric exam 1, which is basically what I've covered so far. So again, the first exam will stop at the first slide of week 4. So this one here. So it will stop at the first slide of week 4. So it will cover week 2, right? Week 3, this one, and then week 3, and then the first slide of week 4. Okay, the one I showed you, just the first 2 slides. Do not worry, again, I already mentioned that. Do not worry about week 1. Those are just introductory. This is just introductory material, so you don't have to be. You won't be tested on this. This is just if you want to have some little background regarding the theory of music, but you don't have to know because you're not going to be tested on. It's not the purpose of this class. Okay, it's focused more on the history. So next video I will do the first exam review, and I will just show you something about the first quiz. Okay, which won't be anytime soon because you have plenty of things to do. I mean, in the sense that you have plenty of time to watch the videos and to start thinking about the first exam and the things and the questions I showed you today. Right? Have a nice day.